The 2025 NFL Draft is just a couple of months away, so in this video, let's go ahead and do a early 2025 NFL mock draft. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, hit the like and subscribe button. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers, so hit the subscribe button, but let's hop into it. So as you can see, we are on the PFF mock draft simulator. We're going to be doing every single team, no trades, just the first round. And we are going to begin with the Tennessee Titans, who, of course, need to be taking a quarterback. Will Levis clearly is not the guy, and I do think the guy for them is likely going to be either Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. I think Cam Ward to me is just a bit more of a playmaker that might match the style of what Tennessee wants to do moving forward. I think Shedeur has better accuracy and better mechanics in the pocket, but I think as a pure playmaker and as a player that can develop in a system, I do think Cam Ward might be a better prospect than Shedeur Sanders when it comes down to if you want somebody who can develop into becoming a top tier quarterback. I think Shedeur is a good player, but I do think that his ceiling is a little bit lower than a player like Cam Ward. I think Cam Ward, if he reaches his potential, could potentially be like a top 15 level quarterback. Whereas for Shedeur, I think that at his best, he is a meddling, okay quarterback that can potentially lead a team to a championship, but is never going to be considered like a top 5 quarterback out there. Whereas for Cam Ward, I think that he can reach those levels if he gets the right coaching, if he gets time to develop, and if he maximizes his potential. Then we have the Cleveland Browns. Now, I don't really know what this team is going to do with the number 2 overall pick. They could take a quarterback, they could trade the pick, they could take a non-quarterback. I don't know. Me personally, I do think that this team has got to figure out the quarterback position, and unfortunately, free agency and the trade market just isn't really that good this year, so I think they're going to have to reach on a quarterback, aka reaching on a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders. While I don't personally view Shedeur Sanders as like a extremely high ceiling player, I do think that his floor is relatively safe. I think that for the most part, he's going to be a good quarterback in the NFL. I just don't know if he's ever going to be considered a great quarterback in the league, which for a team like Cleveland, which is a team that hasn't had a good quarterback in a while, I do think that Shedeur Sanders would make a bit of sense for their team. He's fairly accurate. Yes, he can hold on to the ball a little bit too long, take some reckless sacks, and so on and so forth. And he doesn't have the greatest athleticism or playmaking ability, but he has a strong arm. He's got a very capable arm. He's very accurate. I think he reads defense at a higher level than Cam Ward. I think he's somebody that can play basically right away, and because he's dealt with pressure his whole life, I don't think the moments are ever going to be too big for him. Then at number 3, we have the New York Giants. This pick is pretty simple. We're going to be taking Travis Hunter here. Whether it's wide receiver or cornerback, this Giants team could realistically use both of those positions. He's solid in zone coverage. I think he has pretty decent foot speed to at least keep up with NFL wide receivers, and if he does play receiver to, get some separation. He's a playmaker. He does all the things that you want to do. I think that he is the best player in this draft, and for a team like New York that has had issues in the secondary as well as in the receiving core, especially if Darius Slayton does leave, I think Travis Hunter would fill a really nice void on that roster. The only thing that they would have to do is figure out the quarterback position, which is probably the hardest thing they're going to have to answer this offseason. Then at number 4, I'm going to take Abdul Carter. Now, in past mock drafts, I've had them taking an offensive lineman, but basically every single time I've done that, Patriots fans have been all over my case about not taking Abdul Carter. I still do believe that a pick like Will Campbell makes a bunch of sense, but in this scenario, I'm going to make Patriots fans a little bit more happy and take Abdul Carter. I think he is arguably probably the second best prospect in this draft. His first step is ridiculous. He's a freak athlete. Former linebacker turned into an edge rusher, has pretty decent hands, but could maybe use a little bit of some improvement there. When people make comparisons between him and Micah Parsons, I don't think it's just because they wore 11, they both went to Penn State, they're both edge rushers, they kind of look alike. I don't really think that's quite it. I think it's because they honestly play pretty similar to one another, especially because they both were linebackers that turned into edge rushers, except for Micah. He was a linebacker all throughout college that turned into an edge rusher in the NFL. I think he has a lot of similarities to Micah Parsons and with Abdul Carter, so I think it does make a ton of sense for the Patriots. They don't really have that go-to pass rusher quite yet. I still think the offensive line needs a bunch of work, but Abdul Carter would make that defense a whole lot better. Next up, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they need help in the secondary pretty darn bad. You could go Mason Graham here to fix up the interior of the defensive line, but they've already invested so much into that interior and exterior of the defensive line that they have to eventually pay some attention to their secondary, and I think by adding Will Johnson, that would be a cornerback one that would make a ton of sense. He's got very good understanding of how to use his leverage, very good size, very good speed, has really good hand usage. I will say his first punch can be a tad bit inconsistent, but for the most part, when I watch this film, I think that he is just an incredible cornerback that can play press, he can play off man, he can play zone coverage. I think he's a really smart cornerback that will make this Jaguars defense a whole lot better. Then there's the Raiders, and truth be told, I think there's a lot of potential picks on the board here. They could go Ted McMillan to add alongside Jacoby Myers. They could go Mason Graham to add next to Christian Wilkins and just make the best defensive line in the entire NFL. And then there's also Ashton Jeanty, Malachi Starks, and some other corners on the board. But I think ultimately I'm going to go with Ashton Jeanty here. I do believe that Ashton Jeanty is probably the second best player on the board, but when it comes to a position of need, running back is a lot higher than interior defensive line, especially when you just brought in Christian Wilkins. Ashton Jeanty is a total freak. He is by far the best running back in this draft. Very good contact balance, a playmaker, very good feet, very explosive. Maybe not the greatest in terms of like pass blocking and stuff like that, but you're probably not going to ask him to do all that. Maybe you could ask some other guys like Amir Abdullah to do that sort of stuff because maybe you don't want your Ashton Jeanty to do so, but I think he's solid enough in pass coverage to, you know, be okay at it, and I think he's an incredible player that would make the Raiders a better team. Then we have the New York Jets. Now you could go McMillan, but truth be told, because I don't think this team is going to be really all that competitive on the offensive end next year, barring some crazy trade or something going on in this year's draft, I do think that they should just go best player available, and I do believe that that is Mason Graham. The only concerning thing about him is that he does have arms that are on the shorter end, but I'm not that worried about him. He's got incredible first step. He's very explosive, very powerful with his hands, has really good technique, knows how to hold onto their block, knows how to push their blocker, so on and so forth. Mason Graham makes a bunch of sense for the New York Jets, and you pair him alongside Quinnen Williams, and that is probably the best interior defensive lineman group in the entire NFL. Then you have the Carolina Panthers, and at pick number 8, this is probably worst case scenario because Mason Graham is off the board, Will Johnson, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, they're all off the board, and the Carolina Panthers really need all those guys on their team, so I wouldn't be shocked if the Panthers try to potentially trade up to take one of those guys. But in this situation, I think they still probably just go best player of a positional need in the defensive line. And I think of the guys available, I do believe that James Pierce Jr. is the best pure pass rusher in this draft class. Now, on PFF, they do have him ranked 29th, but I would probably say that if they were to ever update their rankings, he's going to be much higher on the board. I think he is by far the best pass rusher outside of Abdul Carter in this draft class. Better than Jalen Walker, better than Michael Williams, better than Shamar Stewart, better than Nick Scourton. He's twitchy, he's explosive, has a pretty decent first step, is a little bit on the lighter side, so I would like to see him add a little bit of weight to his frame. And while he's pretty raw with his pass rushing technique, I do believe that there is something there that could really make him a better player than a lot of these other guys. I think by far that he is the best available player in the edge rushing room that is currently on the board. And I think it does make some sense for the Carolina Panthers. I don't necessarily think he's going to come out the gates with like a 10 sack season in his rookie season, but I would not be shocked if by his third year in the NFL, he's probably a double-digit sack type of guy. I don't know if he's really going to be dominant versus the run, but I think he can be solid enough. Then there's the New Orleans Saints. I am going to go with Nick Scourton here to add to their defensive line. Now, he's around 280 pounds, but he holds it very, very well. He looks very lean and very muscular for that size. I don't really love his run defense, which might be a tad bit concerning for the New Orleans Saints, but I think that he can develop into becoming a better player at that because he is so big and so strong and flexible and so on and so forth that I think he can make up for it with his size. And if he improves at it in the NFL level, I think that he's going to be a pretty decent 3-down defensive lineman. He's got a bunch of really solid pass rush moves, whether it's swiping, whether it's bull rushing, whether it's finesse, stuff like that. For somebody who is close to 280 pounds, I think that he has a really good skill set that will translate to the NFL level, kind of similar to James Pierce Jr. I don't really know if I would expect him to go out there in year one to have 10 sacks. I kind of think that he'll have like a 6-sack season to start off his career, and then hopefully he'll develop into becoming a better pass rusher as time goes on. Next is the Chicago Bears. This one's pretty simple. It's going to be Will Campbell. Will Campbell will likely move inside inside to guard because his length in arms is a tad bit concerning, but very smart player, very physical player. When he gets his hands on you, they're like vice grips. You're not getting out of there. I think he's a really good player that would make the offensive line for the Chicago Bears a whole heck of a lot better. San Francisco's on the board, and I'm going to go ahead and take Josh Simmons. I believe before his injury, he was probably offensive tackle 1 or 2 in this year's draft, but because the injury kind of dropped him off the board for a lot of teams, but I'm not going to fall for the bait. That offensive line for San Francisco needs a lot of work with the potential for a left tackle positioning opening up for the first time in a while. It would make sense for Josh Simmons to be the pick. He can play left tackle. He could play right tackle. I don't really know if he'll move inside to guard, but probably will stick to tackle, and honestly, the 49ers could really use that. He's got good knee bend. He's got good technique. I like his first punch. I would say that his lower half has some concerns, but I'm not terribly worried about some of those issues that he's shown on film. I just think he's a really good player that hopefully will come back from this injury playing at a very high level. Next up, you have the Dallas Cowboys, and there's 2 players that are really speaking out to me right now, and that's Kelvin Banks and Tetairoa McMillan. Now, Kelvin Banks makes a bunch of sense if the Dallas Cowboys were to move off of Terrence Steele at the right tackle position so that you could put Kelvin Banks at left tackle and then move Tyler Guyton back to right tackle, which I believe he was a right tackle at Oklahoma. I do think he's a great player, but they've addressed the offensive line so much these past couple years, and when you have a guy like Ted McMillan available, I kind of think you have to take him. Ted McMillan to me is like the perfect counter to what you have in CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb is somebody who can move inside and outside, flexible piece that is just, he's a true wide receiver 1. He's a freak of nature. Ted McMillan, on the other hand, is somebody who can also move inside and out, maybe more so on the outside, though I don't love his tape against press man coverage. He is going to have to work on that. What I will say is, while he's not a dominant route runner, he's able to create separation because of how just big he is. He isn't Rome Odunze-like. I just think that Rome Odunze might be a little bit better than Ted McMillan, but in terms of pure size, Ted McMillan is massive. He also is a hands catcher, which is really important for the wide receiver position. He's a smooth runner. He's got very long strides. Again, I don't really know if he's going to be an insane separator at the NFL level, but I wouldn't say guys like T. Higgins or Rome Odunze are that kind of guys either. I kind of think he's going to play similar to those guys, and those guys would be the perfect balance with a guy like CeeDee Lamb. I think he would make the receiving core so much better and give Dak some really good weapons that they have really been needing these past like 2 years. Next up is the Miami Dolphins, and with a player like Kelvin Banks on the board, it is really tempting, but I just think that they need to go with a safety here to add to their secondary to make their defense that much better. I feel like the offensive line for Miami wasn't abysmal this year. It wasn't great, but it wasn't abysmal, and I think it's a pretty deep offensive lineman class, so you could probably take one in the second round and feel pretty good about him. I'll also say I don't think Kelvin Banks moves inside to guard either, so it doesn't make a ton of sense to take him here. Malachi Starks, on the other hand, does make a bunch of sense. He's a very well-built safety with elite ball skills, and his pursuit angles can be a little bit inconsistent, but I'm not too worried about that. Based off the film that I watch, I think he's incredible in coverage, and I think he's decent enough in run defense that you don't have to worry too much about him. He's a physical player that's going to get you some turnovers, going to get you some interceptions, and I think this Dolphins team could really utilize this player in a lot of unique ways in the back line of their defense. Then there's the Indianapolis Colts, and with a guy like Tyler Warren on the board, it makes so much sense to take him. He is a versatile piece that isn't just going to play tight end. He can go out there and play receiver, fullback. Hell, maybe you can throw him out there at quarterback. I think he would be a really good physical player to add to this offense that has just been missing the tight end position for so many years now. And I do think Tyler Warren could be that versatile piece that allows a guy like Anthony Richardson to feel like he has a safe outlet to throw the ball to, somebody that you can consistently rely upon. And I do believe that Tyler Warren can be the guy. Is he a freak athlete? I wouldn't necessarily say he's a freak athlete per se, but when it comes to being somebody who just finds ways to get separation, finds ways to get open, can be utilized in so many different ways, I think he would allow so much creativity on that Colts offense that has kind of been missing without that tight end position really being secure. With Tyler Warren on this team, I think it opens up so many things in the playbook to go to a tight end and just allow Anthony Richardson to feel more comfortable in that offense. Next up at pick number 15, I got the Atlanta Falcons taking edge rusher Mykel Williams. Very good size, very good arm length. He's got a great motor. He is an incredible athlete. His first step is ridiculous. What I will say though, while his first step is really good. I think his anticipation of the snap could definitely be worked with. It needs to be improved upon with his general timing, because if he can get that timing down, his first step is truly ridiculous, and I think he could generate so much more pressure if he would just time his anticipation a bit better. Because he has really good arm length, this is somebody that has a bunch of versatile maneuvers that he can do to get some sort of pass rush on the quarterback. I don't really know if he's ever going to be the best edge rusher out there, but when you're taking an edge rusher 15th overall, I think he is going to be somebody that at some point could average, I don't know, 8+ sacks a season. And with Micah Williams, he would just add so much to the pass rushing unit of the Atlanta Falcons that has just been missing these past few years, especially this year. That defensive line was abysmal for the Atlanta Falcons, and I think with Michael Penix on the offense should be better. Now you can look to add some attrition to your defensive line in somebody like Micah Williams. But at pick 16, this is where I'm going to take offensive tackle Kelvin Banks. I think Kelvin Banks is damn near flawless in pass protection. The only concern I do have for him is he can be a little bit reckless in run blocking, but I think that can be honed in at the NFL level. He's a very smart player. 3-year starter at Texas, was a really good player for them his entire time there, won many awards, many all-conference, all-SEC honors, so on and so forth. The interesting thing for that pick for the Arizona Cardinals is they do have a couple tackles already on the team, so they'll have to kind of figure that one out. But I do think by adding Kelvin Banks, you're protecting Kyler Murray at a very high level and allowing him to have 2 really young tackles to build for the future with. Next is the Cincinnati Bengals, and I think they need to add something to the defensive line. Right now, you have BJ Hill, who's a free agent. Trey Hendrickson only has 1 more year on his contract, though I will suppose that he is going to get a contract here very soon. Outside of those 2 guys, you really don't have anyone on that defensive line that seriously does scare a quarterback. Joseph Ossai, by the end of the season, was one of their full-time pass rushers, and while I like Joseph Ossai, I just don't think that he should be a starter. He's more of a rotational piece. So this team needs to find somebody who can come in and generate pressure, and unfortunately, a lot of the top-tier edge rushers were off the board, so I'm going to have to reach here on a player who I'm not quite sold on to a very high level yet, but I do think that he is a good player, and that is Jack Sawyer of Ohio State. He's definitely a late riser. In most of my previous mock drafts, I had him in the 2nd round, but his game against Texas and so far just his entire run in the playoffs has been extremely dominant. I like Jack Sawyer. He's got your prototypical size. Wouldn't necessarily say that he's a freak athlete, but he's extremely strong. Kind of like Jared Verse, where Jared Verse isn't like an insane athlete. I would say Verse is a better athlete than Sawyer, but when it comes to what style they are, they're power rushers, and I think Jack Sawyer is that sort of guy. When you have somebody like Trey Hendrickson who can be a bit more of a finesse guy, and I think it would be nice to sort of counter the finesse of Trey Hendrickson with somebody like Jack Sawyer, who's a bit more of a power guy, who can show a little bit of some bend, a little bit of some finesse here and there. I think this pick makes a lot of sense for this team because Jack Sawyer, to me, is a very safe pick, and I would imagine that he's going to be a hit in the NFL level, so I think it's a safe pick to make here at pick 17. Next up, the Seattle Seahawks, and we're going to be taking somebody who has flew up the PFF mock draft boards and has flew up on my radar. Wasn't too familiar of this guy until, honestly, these past 2 weeks when I started doing a little bit more research on him, and I kind of found out that Armand Membu is a absolute stud. When you talk about somebody who is just strong, physical, fast, Armand Membu is kind of that guy. While I do think that his technique does need a little bit of work, I also think basically everyone in this draft has to work on their technique or else, they've maximized their potential. He's got to maximize his potential, but I think that he has a really solid frame, really solid size. I think he's a more tackle guy than interior offensive lineman, so ideally you're going to move him to right tackle and sort of keep him there, especially with all the injuries of Lucas. Again, I think his technique needs to be improved upon. I saw a lot of progress from 2023 to 2024. Now I want to see that next step in 2025. Continue improving your technique. I think his hand placement is a little erratic right now, but I think once he gets that honed in, he could be a really good player. Then there's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at pick number 19. They need to address the cornerback position. I would go edge rusher, but there's not an edge rusher on the board that to me is a extremely dominant pass rusher. Like right now, like you could take Shamar Stewart, maybe you go Mike Green, but I think corner might also be a bit of a bigger need. And if Benjamin Morrison does declare to this draft, which I think he should, and I think he will, I do think that he is arguably the best cornerback on the board. Before the injury, injury, he was thought of as a potential top 10 pick in this year's draft, but because he suffered a hip injury, which is a pretty major injury, if he can come back from that injury okay, I think he's easily a top 25 pick. He has some really good film in 2023 and even in the early portion of the 2024 season while he only played a handful of games. I do think Benjamin Morrison is a really good player, really good technique. He has good size, good frame, good length, good hand. It just depends on how he looks post-injury. Then there's the Denver Broncos. I think you have to add some pieces in the receiving core, and to me, Luther Burden is the best receiver still on the board. Versatility to be used on the outside and in the slot. I do think he'll probably stay in the slot, which is okay for this Broncos team because you already have Cortland Sutton on the outside. I do think Luther Burden can work both ways. He had a bit of a disappointing 2024 season. 2023 was clearly better. He was like a top 5 potential pick after 2023, but 2024, I think more so because of quarterback play, his stock sort of dropped, but I still do think he's a really good player. Again, can play on the inside, can play on the outside. Would be a really nice counter to what you already have with Cortland Sutton. That team needs to add some receiving help really badly, and I think Luther Burden could be the guy. Next up, pick 21. I believe the Pittsburgh Steelers have got to draft a corner, and I love Jahdae Barron. He has just been improving his draft stock week in and week out, most recently in his Ohio State game, where I thought he had a really, really good game versus basically everyone out there, whether it was Jeremiah Smith or Emeka Egbuka or Carnell Tate. I thought Jahdae Barron had a really good game. Granted, against Jeremiah Smith, he was receiving a lot of safety help over the top, but that's more of just how good Jeremiah Smith is. And when he does come out in the 2027 NFL draft or 26, wherever that might be, he's probably going to be like a top 5 pick. But Jahdae Barron has been an incredible cornerback all year long. The Thorpe Award winner, great technique, great versatility, can play safety, nickel, outside corner, wherever this team wants to utilize him. I think he'd be fantastic. You already have your major cornerback one in Joey Porter Jr. Now you add Jahdae Barron opposite of him, whether you want to put him in the nickel, put him on the outside, or even move him up to safety. He would give that defense some versatility to really make that defense a whole lot better. He also is not a risky pick. I know what I'm getting in Jahdae Barron. He isn't the fastest, he isn't the greatest inside, but my God, he's smart, has great anticipation, good ball skills. He would be, in my opinion, a home run hit for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I think it makes a bunch of sense. Next up, the LA Chargers. Jim Harbaugh is going to have to put his Michigan pride aside because they're going to be taking Emeka Egbuka. There's a legitimate argument to be made that Emeka is the best receiver available in this year's draft, and honestly, I'm not necessarily going to disagree with you. My only counter to that is that he doesn't necessarily have an elite trait, which I do think that Luther and Ted McMillan both have. I think they have elite traits. I don't know if Emeka has a necessarily elite trait per se. What I will say about Emeka is that he is just solid at everything. I think you can move him inside. I think you can move him inside. I think you can move him outside. I think he's really solid route running, has good size, has good speed. Again, he just isn't elite at anything, but I think he's really good at everything. I don't know if Emeka is ever going to be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL, but fortunately for a team like the LA Chargers, they really don't need somebody to be a wide receiver 1 because you already have Ladd McConkey. You would hypothetically have a receiving core of Emeka Egbuka, who I think could be sort of similar to like a Jackson Smith and Jigwell-like player. Then you have Ladd McConkey, who can play inside and outside. Small frame, but is just a really good player that has a good connection with Herbert. Then Quentin Johnston, who is a bit more of a wild card. You just don't know what you're going to get with him, but hopefully he can take a big step in year 3, which we'll see. You could take Colston Loveland, but I'm just not as high on Colston Loveland as I am with a guy like Emeka Egbuka. I just think Emeka is a much safer pick. Yes, I don't know if Harbaugh would take the Ohio State player, but in this situation, you got to put away your Michigan pride and just draft the best player, and I do think Emeka is the best guy on the board. Then we have the Green Bay Packers, and I think that they are likely to take another edge rusher. Unfortunately, Van Ness hasn't quite yet developed into the player that they quite want, but fortunately for them, Jalen Walker is on the board. He was somebody who, prior mock drafts that I've done, he's been a lot higher on my board, but after a bit more research and after watching a few more videos of people who are a lot smarter than me, I've kind of fallen just a tad bit back on him because I think he is extremely raw as an edge rusher. The question for Jalen Walker is, do you want him to be a pure linebacker or do you want to move him to edge rusher? I think for the Packers, they could use that versatility to do a little bit of both with him. Obviously, you took Edgerrin Cooper last year, who has been a fantastic pickup for that team, but with Jalen Walker, he gives you somebody who I truly really do believe can also do a bit of both, but I think is likely going to stick at edge rusher. He is going to need time to develop, which I think is the only drawback about him, but he will see the field early because he is just a really good athlete that can play linebacker and edge rusher. I think he needs to spend most of the offseason focusing in on one position, and that might just be a focus on pass rushing. I do believe that if he maximizes his potential, we're looking at somebody who could be a top 15 player in this year's draft. I do think Jalen Walker would be a nice pick. Now, some people might say, well, why don't the Packers take the best receiver on the board in like Matthew Golden, who I am a big fan of, but I just don't think Matthew Golden is a wide receiver 1 in the NFL. Next up, the Minnesota Vikings. I think they have to look to find a running back. I'm just not quite sold on Aaron Jones. Sure, they could go corner or interior defensive line, but I do think Amari Hampton is a really good round 1 level running back that I think will be a home run hit for the Minnesota Vikings. Very good speed, very good size, very physical runner. I think he's built like an NFL running back. I think he's good in pass blocking, elite power in his lower half. His frame is just really good, especially in his lower body. I do think that there is some hesitancy with him around the line of scrimmage when he is trying to be patient and look around to see where the holes are at. But in the NFL level, I think that will be kind of fixed in his game. And I do believe he's going to be a fantastic running back for the Minnesota Vikings. Next up, the Houston Texans are going to be taking Kenneth Grant here. Now, I do also believe that Matthew Golden could be the pick here. But if we assume Tank Dell does come back healthy sometime next year, I think the receiving core should be fine. Kenneth Grant, though, would give them something in the interior defensive line that they just really don't have right now. For his size, he's an incredible athlete with really solid hands, decent in pass rushing, and really good in the run. They think that he is somebody who is a safe pick for the Houston Texans, and I think for their defensive line, they really could use a big, sturdy body in the interior of the defensive line to just kind of round out their whole unit in general, because you have your pass rushers. You just need somebody up the middle who could just be a sturdy block in there, and I think Kenneth Grant could be the guy. Then there is the LA Rams at pick 26, and I think they need to look at addressing the cornerback room. Their pass rushers are incredible this year. Jared Verse has had an incredible season. I think now you need to look to shore up your secondary a tad bit more, and while I do like Siobhan Revel, there are some injury concerns with them, whereas with Trey Amos, I don't really have too many concerns with him. Now, when it comes to Trey Amos, he's a really solid corner that can just do a bit of everything. I do think his tackling could use a little bit of work. His technique is also a little erratic at times, but when he is on point, he is one of the best cornerbacks out there. Good playmaker, good hands, good physical player, good size. I don't necessarily know if his speed is incredible, but I'm not too worried about that at the NFL level. Is he a true cornerback 1 in this league? I don't know. I think that's something that is still to be determined, but if you want a high-end cornerback 2, I think Trey Amos could be the guy who could potentially be a cornerback 1 at the NFL level. Again, you're picking at pick 26, so to expect a guy this late in the first round to immediately step in and be your true cornerback 1, I think is a little bit of too high of expectations, but if he develops in the right way, he could be that guy, but I do think immediately he would step into that cornerback 2 role and play fairly well. Then there's the Washington Commanders. A couple questions with their edge rushers right now, because you do have Dante Fowler, who's having a really good season, but I believe he is a free agent, and then you have Dorrance Armstrong, who is just a really solid player, but not necessarily a dominant pass rusher. Of the guys available, I like Shamar Stewart, but I don't think he has the pass rushing upside of somebody down the board who is underrated right now on PFF. I do believe in the next couple weeks they'll update this, and he's probably going to be a top 20 prospect in this draft. Mike Green to me is, I don't want to say he's underrated anymore because everyone says he's underrated. So is he really underrated because he's a really good player? This past season had around 17 sacks for Marshall. His tape is just really good, whether it's against good competition or bad competition. He is somebody who's got really good technique, really good size. My only question for him is, again, he played at Marshall. So how is this game going to translate versus high level offensive tackles at the NFL level? What I will say about Mike Green is he gives you a really high ceiling of a player that is taken in the back half of the first round. Of the guys available, again, you're looking at guys like Shamar Stewart, Landon Jackson, Princely, Ashton, JT, Kyle Kennard. I think of those guys, Mike Green is by far the best player with the highest ceiling. Then you have the Baltimore Ravens, and I think they need to look into addressing the cornerback room. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do here because sure, you could go Matthew Golden for receiver, but you already have Zay Flowers, you already have Rashad Bateman, you already have Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Derrick Henry. So I don't really think you need to add much more to the offense. And when it came to the offensive line, I don't really know if there's an interior offensive lineman that I'm in love with this pick. Josh Conerly is going to likely stick at tackle, and even so, not quite sold on him being a first round pick, though I think he might end up a first round pick because I just think that some of these other tackles have kind of fallen off a tad bit. Also, Wyatt Milam probably sticks to guard, and I don't think he's a good fit for the Baltimore Ravens. So in this scenario, I'm going to go with the highest upside corner available, and that would be Siobhan Revel. Great size, good speed, good hands. Injury concerns are the only thing kind of holding him back from being like a top 25 pick, because I do think he has good technique. I think his hands are pretty solid. East Carolina, so you do have to worry about competition a tad bit, but I'm not too worried about it. Ultimately, for Siobhan Revel, it's just going to come down to, is he injury prone? Is this an issue moving forward? But if he can pass those with flying colors, I'm not too worried about him. Then there's the Buffalo Bills, and I think this is where Shamar Stewart goes. Now, this dude is massive, but for his size, he actually moves around pretty well. He does have versatility to play on the inside or on the outside. I think you're going to see him kind of do a bit of both. He might be somebody who can play on the edge here and there while also moving inside a tad bit here and there. Wouldn't necessarily say he has an incredibly high ceiling, but I think he's going to be just a really rock solid starter for this team for the future. Again, there are some question marks with this defensive line, and I don't really know if I'm quite yet sold on Tyleik Williams being a first round pick in this year's draft, especially when there are so many good interior defensive linemen later down the board like TJ Sanders, Walter Nolan, Alfred Collins, Derek Harmon, so many, so forth. So in this scenario, Shamar Stewart fell right to him. He could play edge, he could play in the interior. I think it makes a bunch of sense. Then there's the Philadelphia Eagles. There isn't a pass rusher on the board that I think is worthy of a first round pick. Of the guys here, I think the best player available is either Landon Jackson, and I'm personally pretty high on Braden Swinson, who is extremely underrated, but I don't think he's a first round pick per se. In this scenario, there are a couple players that I do like, and I think the one that I am going to end up taking will be either Josh Conerly to be sort of a Lane Johnson replacement, Tyler Booker to fill in at right guard, or Wyatt Milam, who could also fill in at right guard. In this scenario, I think I am ultimately going to go ahead and take Wyatt Milam because I think he can be a future right guard to be the replacement for Mekhi Becton if they cannot bring him back. Really solid player, really good tape. Dealt with a couple, I believe he had a hand injury. Don't quote me on that, but I believe he had some sort of injury later in the season that was a bit concerning, but I believe he played through it. Wyatt Milam is just the epitome of solid and is going to be a hit in the NFL level. Then there's the Chiefs. They've got to figure out the tackle position because it has been a thorn in the side of the Kansas City Chiefs, but truth be told, they've still been fine with that position being bad. Of the tackles available, Josh Conerly has been the one that has improved his draft stock the most. I was high on Ariante Ursary. I still am fairly high on him, but I do think he might be better suited as a guard. Cameron Williams has also kind of fallen off these past few weeks, but the only concern with him is that he does have some knee issues, so I do think that might bounce him out of the first round. I like Gray Zabel, but again, probably guard. Same thing with Jonas Samania. So yeah, Josh Conerly is probably the best pure tackle on the board, whether it's left or right tackle. Great athlete, good size, good technique. He's arguably a top 25 player if he goes to the right team. But then there is the Detroit Lions, and the offensive line is a bit concerning for me, and I think of the players available on the board here, I think I might be leaning towards Tyler Booker as the highest upside interior offensive lineman. He is massive. He is somebody who, when he gets his hands on you, you're really not going to leave him. And when you got a team like Detroit that wants to smash you in the mouth, Tyler Booker to me is the epitome of, when I get my hands on you, I'm going to drive you into the dirt and I'm going to make sure that you look like an idiot. I think Tyler Booker could be a really good pick for the Detroit Lions. So this then concludes my 2025 NFL mock draft. You guys let me know in the comment section below, what do you guys think about my mock draft? Do you think there should be any changes made? And if you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button. Again, road to 10K, so subscribe if you're not subscribed. But I love you guys. Peace.